This is quite a question with former member, acting member. You all know there was a discussion in Italy to abolish the Senate. And there are in Italy, it's a quite strange situation, some senators for life. And one of those senators for life is Mario Monti. And when there was a discussion to abolish the Senate, he said to me, it might be possible that I'm in the future già senatore a vita. Okay, thank you so much, Heidi, for your excellent presentation. And now we have the chance to discuss, ask questions. I understand you have time until 11 o'clock.
But I mean, please proceed as you wish.
Okay, so that's fine. So I invite first the members. I was criticized yesterday evening that I had given the floor to a non-former member before I gave the floor to all former members, so I apologize because I tried to be helpful. So I ask our future members of parliament who are sitting in the last rows that you wait a little bit and we start with our former members of parliament and then you join in. Who wants to take the floor? Pat Cox. You understand?
This is just a very brief remark. Towards the end of her remarks, Heidi talked about the sustainability challenge. I think it is the great intergenerational challenge. And one phrase, and that's all I want to contribute, which I regret to say is not my phrase because I think it's very good. We've had all the recent reports, IPCC, World Wildlife Fund, UN, United States, denied by President Trump, but it's his own administration produced the science, the United Kingdom. Marco Lambertini, who's the Executive Director of World Wildlife Fund, said in 2 sentences everything we need to know, in my view, if we don't reject the science. We are the first generation to know we are destroying the planet. We are the last generation who can do something about it. And that, to me, is the core message.
Thank you so much, Pat. I suggest that we... Vitaliano Gemelli, per favore.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you for the remarks from the President and the Vice President of the Parliament. I think that we need to look at the issue of changing the relationship between institutions and the citizen. This process of the relationship between institution and citizen is something that is continually evolving, and institutions have to get closer to the citizen. Today, it isn't enough for the governments to mediate between the EU and the citizen. It's no longer enough. The governments are in the middle between the institutions and the citizens, and that's because it's easier for the governments to blame the EU or to pass on all the problems they cannot solve domestically at EU level. Secondly, I think we need to create a greater social dimension for the citizens because we're moving towards greater individualization or individualism globally. So if you look at what Trump is doing, look at what Putin is doing, it's all about this unbridled individualism where power is being focused on individuals and it's not democratic. So what I've proposed to my party, my political group, the EPP, is that for the election campaign we should hold 4 conferences, one on the institutions and the citizens, one on the social dimension of the EU, one on the global role of the EU for peace, and one on the environment dimension to be played by the EU. And I think all the other groups should do the same, talking to the citizens about these problems. Thank you.
Grazie, Vitaliano Gemelli.
Thank you, Mr. Gemelli.
So, Franco Malerba.
And now, Franco Malerba.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Mrs. Hautala. It was very interesting listening to your arguments. As a matter of fact, looking in particular to the Italian situation, I think that there are two elements which have given fuel to the, say, anti-European sentiments, which had never been there. As a matter of fact, Italy was one of the most pro-European countries, if we look at history. But recently, two elements have been, in a sense, put in challenging this historical attitude, and it's the migrant crisis, to which the European Union seemed incapable to give a solution. So in any case, it was poorly audible, and the other one is the unemployment crisis. This is a general topic. So I underline what my dear colleague Mr. Gemelli said. It's important that we stress the social dimension, because otherwise we end up with a set of institutions which are far from the citizen, and it's much too easy to those who want to acquire support with the demagogic arguments to act through the new media and get support just by much too simple arguments. So this is some. By the way, on the other hand, I think there are very good arguments in the field of research and science today. I would think that, again, speaking for Italy, that if there wasn't the European research program, it would be very hard to maintain competitivity, to continue working successfully in the international arena. So all the people who are projected in an international dimension are supporting the European values and European identity. However, in the man in the street now sees, I don't know, the value of his property decrease because there is less order, less wealth, and so these arguments are difficult to counteract, and so it would be good to have a set of arguments for that. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Franco Malerba. I would like to propose that always after three speakers you answer. Is that correct? Okay. And then we come to the next one. I read the names later.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm grateful for Pat Cox for uttering this quote from the WWF leader. First generation to be aware of destruction of the planet, and the last to be able to rescue. I think this is doable. But we have to change fundamentally the ways we work. And by the way, I can share with you that I've taken initiative in this House, a little bit outside my competencies, to inspire a structure that would be facilitating the Parliament to respond to our new global agenda, Agenda 2030, the 17 integrated sustainable development goals, which is a great agenda, and I think the wonderful thing is that the whole world is committed to it. They are universal goals. They don't apply just to developing countries, also to us, whether it's about good governance or gender equality or sustainable consumption, production, etc., etc. And we try to create a light structure which makes it possible to take a more integrated approach. And as you former colleagues and presidents of the House, you know how difficult it is to sort of bring the committees to work together in a constructive manner, because there's always these rivalries, There's a this is mine, and that's yours, and there's something between us. So that's important. Mr. Gemelli and Mr. Malerba, I think you said what I would and should have said, that the social dimension is of utmost importance in order to keep the citizens on board and keep our world sort of capable of addressing the challenges that our societies have. And I think this is actually the key also in the global agenda, because it's the forces of globalization, according to my understanding, who are putting so much pressure on citizens and who create this insecurity, this feeling that indeed, when there is disorder, as I think Mr. Malerba said, then the value of my house is gone, and it's my house is all I have very often. So we need to do something about this, and at least one can say that President Juncker has been a very ardent reminding us about the importance of the social dimension. So let's see how this can be put into practice, but it needs hard work. So thank you so much for these questions and comments.
Thank you so much. Now the next speakers are the following. I read the names so you know whether you are on the agenda. Jean-Pierre Audy, Ole Schmidt, Michael McGowan, Martin Buron, and now Manuel. Jean-Pierre.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. My question, Vice President, is on the national parliaments. Citizens today have two citizenships. They have a national citizenship related to their nationality, and then a European citizenship, which is as a result of the European construct. And it's an ongoing process. And so they have two parliaments. They have their national parliament relating to their national citizenship, and then also the European Parliament as Europeans. And what is your view? Because basically you're talking about the same citizen, since in the past, the links were organic, because before the members of the European Parliament were delegates, and there was a very close. But then we got the universal suffrage. And so people vote now directly for the MEPs. And so that means that now for decades we haven't had a link between the European Parliament and the national parliaments. But then we've got the treaties which are trying to create these organic links. And so what is your view, and what do you think, given the very difficult situation that we're in, how can we make sure that the actions and policies of the national policies tie in with what's being done at European level? There are people who report, but I mean, we know what our governments and heads of state do when they're at the council. They're all very European, and then when they go back home, they sing a different song. So I wanted to ask you your impression on that specific point.
I'd like to make the following proposition, because we have two other speakers, Nicolas Churinda and Inigo Mendes de Vigo, that we stop the list of speakers. I may invite one of the future members of parliament from the young generation, but with the members here, I include after, now it's Ole Schmidt, Michael McGowan, Martin Buron, Manuel Porto, and Henrik Lacks. So I close the list if you agree, and if somebody from your side, from the students, want to take the floor, you are welcome. But so we should give the chance to our next speakers as well. So the next one is Ole Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Heidi. It's always good listening to you. I think it's fair to say that this House and the European Commission tried to sort out the problems in 2015. Those ones that failed were the member states, and they failed in a dramatic way. But that is just a comment. I'm a bit worried of the fragmentation of Europe. I'm from Sweden. You're from Finland. We share many values, and we have a long history together, but recently the largest bank in the Nordic area, Nordea, moved their headquarters from Stockholm to Helsinki. And the reason was that the regulations were better inside the Eurozone and the banking union. And what do you think about this? Will this not create other problems, and perhaps even more severe problems, that someone of us is out and the others are in? And this fragmentation can also mean that perhaps the Eurozone countries will have their own budget, as President Macron is suggesting. Perhaps even here, this House, those countries that are inside the Eurozone may vote. The others, they are going for coffee. Could you please comment on this? And I'm an eager supporter of Sweden joining the Euro, so you know that. This is sort of consumer.
Thank you, Ole Schmidt. One really learns from these discussions. I didn't know this case. So we are in Germany, we are innocent in this question. So Michael McGowan. Exceptional. Exceptional.
Thank you, President. I wonder if you could try and identify to some extent why the European Union and its institutions haven't really been able to take on board the public, the citizens of Europe. And I think this is partly to do with the national parliaments. Still a feeling, I think, across Europe that the European Parliament is often a platform for national platforms, really. I mean, I was quite interested that I was involved very much in the intergroup on peace in the European Parliament. You know, I think we should all be concerned that this is the most interesting, most important peace project, you know, I think probably in the history of the world. But there wasn't always a big presence at the discussions on peace by the two major groups in the European Parliament, who seem to be looking more very much to, representing their national interests at home. The Christian Democrats, which have been very much a very positive centre, played such an important part. Socialist group as well, which isn't quite as socialist as perhaps it ought to be, but there was a much bigger presence of the Green members and Communist members in the intergroups and on European initiatives within the Parliament itself. I think also it's interesting that the members of the House of Commons and the other national parliaments don't take a lot of interest in international affairs and European affairs in particular. So it's not surprising that the citizens are not fully aware of this. And I think there's a responsibility for all of us to make sure we are choosing candidates for national parliaments that have got a real commitment to their region and also a commitment to internationalism and support for the United Nations besides the European. And this does not always happen. You know, Mrs. Theresa May is quite happy to say, well, what sort of Brexit do you want? I want a red, white and blue Brexit. Now, this sort of talk should not really be example. I think what we can all be doing as citizens and as former members is continuing to make our international and European links. I'm involved in a project in my region, which is the north of England. 3 universities in my region, the University of Leeds, where I'm on the board of the Centre for African Studies, the University of York and the University of Sheffield. They've set up a project called the White Rose Project, which takes advantage of and involves them in academic research. And they've taken a decision earlier this year to invest that this office that they set up in Brussels about 3 years ago will continue whatever the situation is of the of the Brexit decision. So whatever the outcome, we must continue with this. And I think we mustn't have too much arrogance that the Europe. I like to talk about human values rather than just European values. And we know the difficulties in the world, but they also look in detail at our own situation where, some countries even have national lists. It's unbelievable. Some MEPs live permanently in Brussels. This is not good behaviour.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. So, Heidi.
Yeah, thank you. I try to remember the limits of the time. So Jean-Pierre Audy and also Michael McGowan in some ways touched the issue of the relationship of the national parliaments to the European Parliament and where is the place for the citizen. And I must say that I'm quite proud to be a Finnish MEP because when Finland joined the European Union, it put in place the constitutional structure whereby the national parliament did not give away any of its legislative powers. And that's not the case in the countries that you represent. This is not the case in France. It's not the case in the UK. And let me just speculate that one of the reasons, the underlying reasons of why Brexit, and I want to use this expression deliberately, got out of hands, is because the House of Commons is so outsider to the British government, the executive, to exerting influence and power in Brussels. And this, for me, it would be the simplest thing in the European structures, that each national parliament would take a total grip of its own executive and demand that it is a legislator, also in European affairs. So this is not something that we can really push from the European level. It should come from the member states, but there's only about 3 or 4 member states, to my knowledge, where this works properly. I think in Austria, in Germany, Estonia, Finland. Any more? Denmark. Yeah. Denmark was the beginning. That's true. That was the model, because they had this Marketsudvalg. It was the Committee for Internal Market at that time. It was before Maastricht, and then it evolved. But anyway, so I think this is my message to always and everywhere, that please talk to your national parliaments, that they need to have a proper say, a proper competence in the EU. Then the last remark maybe about to Ole Schmidt. I think, it was very interesting to see that that Nordea took this decision, and I think the reason is what you say, and the fragmentation is the reality in the euro area. So, but how can we sort of let's say care for the euro area and bring the countries that are still outside banking union, the euro, together, so that we can at the same time ensure that there is a balance between the sort of, let's say, the responsibility of the member states to respect what we have agreed together, or basically we have an intergovernmental treaty. The fiscal compact is still, to my knowledge, an intergovernmental treaty, and solidarity. I think this is also what has divided Europe into south and north a bit. So how to find that balance? So Hans-Gert, I think I will leave you. There was maybe one question from the...
There was 3 others, so if
okay,
we can stick to 11.
I have time. It's up to you. Yeah.
So we have still 3, and I think if we are not too long, we can manage. Martine Buron, Manuel Porto et Henrik Lax. Martine Buron.
Oui,
Madam Vice President, my question is about a very specific matter of the information and communication policy, as you're a member of the working group dealing with these matters. At the start of your remarks, you said something that all of us former members are aware of, namely a screaming lack of information on the part of EU citizens about the EU institutions, its scope, then the actual area of their possible intervention, their competences. Now, the French president, I don't necessarily share all his political positions. No one can deny, however, he is a convinced European. Now, he, in France and other European countries, has launched a citizen consultation process. This year, it ran for 6 months. I have been involved in one of these civil society organizations that promote the EU and its values. Now, our governments, the governments of the member states, are often lacking in their duty to inform people about the EU. However, on the other hand, there are many civil society and local authority organisations who know exactly what they have to thank from the EU, and they do the right communication. But in France, what has flowed from these citizen consultations is, on the one hand, the fact that people really are interested. They really want to know what's happening in Europe and why it doesn't work better than it does. And of course, it's also confirmed just how confused people are between what is the preserve of the member states, the governments of the member states, and what falls under the powers of the EU. Now, I think it's very educational and helpful in terms of preparing for the elections. The people who participated in these debates were very, from many different areas, very varied public. They want the campaign to give them more information, but after that as well, we have to continue ongoing campaigns. At the moment, the European Parliament is debating the multi-annual financial framework. And in that context, there are certain policies that allow the EU to do its information work, even though there isn't a lot of budget there. Now, I don't need to mention Erasmus+, that's very successful. It's going to have its budget cut, but there's a new programme, Rights, Justice, with a sub-programme on citizens. It's called Europe for Citizens. Now, there's a few amendments on this in the Parliament. The suggestion is granting just €1 per citizen, 500,000 euros in the forthcoming MFF to allow this programme to do twinning and other things, and that would have useful things for the citizens. So what's your view on that?
And I ask the last two speakers to consider the time. Manuel Porto and Henry Lux.
Yes, it is a quick question, and congratulations. I would like to ask you very concretely, how can we explain, you spoke about populism, nationalism, and also about globalization. People do not, just two remarks, looking at the economy, in 2040, China and India will have 45% of the world GDP. People in Europe do not notice that. Looking to the population, there is an interesting report of the Commission from last year, Harnessing Globalization, with the projection of population. Asia will have 4.8 thousand million people. Africa will be 4.4. Now we have 700 million people. We have less than that. So people do not. What can you explain? People do not understand that alone we can do nothing. And what can be done? So just a very precise question.
Okay, obrigado, Manuel. Henrik Lux.
Thank you, Heidi, for a very fluent and coherent presentation. I have two brief comments, which I hope will be useful for you and for us. I think it was very important when you started by pointing out that the Parliament is an important political forum, something which hasn't got very much, hasn't been very much noticed in the member states. I think that's very important, and I was happy to learn about the impact you presented. We must remember that the EU is a historic experiment, and it's still a work in progress. And there are some serious also institutional deficiencies, and I would just point to one of them, a difficulty for the citizens to make their representatives politically accountable. Every important legislative decision taken in this House is taken by ad hoc majorities. So it's practically impossible for the citizens to know who is responsible for what. Thank you, and good luck.
So they are compatriots.
Yeah.
You
Will there be the
this.
question from the
One last question from our students, please.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just a very brief question. I've seen, Mrs. Hautala, in your description that you are quite in favor of referenda, let's say. Do you think it's the way to go to involve citizens in the European project? Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We take the others for the next round, okay?
Yeah,
Heidi,
yeah,
please.
yeah, thank you. Martin Buron, je pense que vous avez tout à fait raison parce que
I think that you're very right, because it's true that at the moment we're really talking about the multi-annual financial framework, and that is an opportunity for us to talk about the objectives of the European Union, because the challenges of Europe, then the world and citizens are different now. And I think that the consultation of citizens through civil society, through territorial organizations, the things that you were talking about are really important for us. I think we do need that consultation with citizens.
Dear Henrik, I think there are now quite interesting, let's say, electronic channels to follow the voting behavior of the MEPs. Of course, we always had the protocols and we had the procès verbal et tout ça. But at the moment, you can really make your MEP accountable. You can see exactly how a group voted, how a member voted, how a national delegation, which all we know is a bit of an illusion, but we can do that. And one of my favorite exercises, sort of, maybe it's a little bit also about the political competition that is apparent when elections are coming. My predecessors from the Green Party in Finland, we produced such a, how did your MEP vote? We pick up key votes. We try to be quite fair, so we don't bust people in some unexpected situations. We think the votes must reflect a genuine question in a proper context, and we should not sort of put people into difficult place unnecessarily. But we have the right to expose which Finnish MEPs are against environmental protection and which are in favor, which are voting for the rights of women to abortion, which are voting against, you know. So I think this is a kind of a consumer information that we can also provide ourselves as an institution. I think Vote Watch is quite a respected and, let's say, well received channel for following the MEP behavior. But of course, you are right, these are ad hoc majorities. My impression at the moment is that your group, ALDE, is a bit of a balance. It's a bit of, you know, if ALDE goes this way or that way, that will be the majority. We don't have the grand coalition at the moment. We don't. We did have it at the beginning when the key posts were distributed, but not anymore. Manuel Porto, I think your question was about the sort of the yeah, and why? Yeah, okay. Ooh, that's something that I hope you all will discuss. But instead of condemning nationalists and populists, I think it's time to understand what drives them. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my strong feeling is that it comes from feeling of being outside. And two colleagues talk about the social dimension, Mr. Gemelli and Mr. Malerba. And I think this is really something that we have to look at, because if people feel they are not a part of the society, then I think we will not come across the populism and nationalism. Then the question about the referenda, it's true. Of course, looking at the Brexit referendum, my only comment is that for me, having followed the sort of tradition of direct democracy in Switzerland, for instance, which is a really rooted political culture, Brexit is a joke. The referendum, how it was organized, was not a referendum. It was a kind of, hey, come on, shall we leave the EU or not? I mean, what is that? For me, the legitimacy of that decision is non-existing. And I cannot see why the British public and the political elite is so soft on this point. So thank you very much.